Welcome everybody to a webinar that we've been having after quite some time. We will be doing this every 6 weeks or so going forward because there are so many areas of interest that I'm sure the travel industry wants to learn more about. Today's topic is tourism demand for Sri Lanka, which is general demand from multiple origins. This is a follow-up to the webinar that we had with Oliver, who's gracing us with his presence as well, about 3 months ago in terms of the outlook back in November, and he's going to update us as to what the world is thinking in terms of traveling to Sri Lanka currently in February and March. We are also talking about a very topical subject, which is China reopening, and Richard just landed a couple of hundred travelers here, I think yesterday or the day before, so I'm sure he'll talk more about it. So that is today's topic, global demand and China in particular. Now, in terms of global demand, those of us in the trade know that demand has been weak. We are at the most 50% on same time last year. Yields are lower. Our origin mix is weak. The critical European traveler who kind of sustains the industry through longer stays and higher spends is not here to the same level as they were, largely because of an entire lack of consumer communication. We spoke about that earlier. So there is a concern that what the situation is in Sri Lanka. Now, we know from a tourism standpoint, things are perfectly back to normal, but most travelers are not aware of that because after the headlines receded, there wasn't a follow-up consumer campaign. The industry has been talking about this for quite some time, and it really has not got anywhere. So let's see what we can do to circumvent that. Organic growth is starting as fears recede with the passage of time. We've done, the Tourism Alliance, as many of you know, have done our own bit of destination marketing. It's good to see others also looking at it, because my firm view is that the private sector has to take this on. We really cannot expect a government department to position a country in a sophisticated manner, which is largely consumer and digital. It's never been done before. So I don't see why there would be a change now. In terms of the campaign that the Tourism Alliance started back in October, we've had 30 million ad exposure, 180,000 web visitors to our Love Sri Lanka site, 255,000 page views. And interestingly, in terms of exposure, 17 million views in the UK, Spain 4 million, France 3.6, Germany 1.9, India 2.8. So like this, there are so many campaigns. Dentsu, Grant, Sligo and Tassel also launched a campaign yesterday, which is great news. So I think we really have to take our positioning and communications into our own hands going forward. In terms of China, lifting of travel restrictions is really going to be a major boost to economic growth and opportunity in Asia and globally. Just reading out some stats. According to the UNWTO, World Tourism Organization, the pandemic cost destinations worldwide 270 billion in Chinese outbound tourist spending in 2020 and 21 alone, $270 billion. China grew to be the biggest tourism source market in the world prior to the pandemic. In 2019, Chinese tourists spent a collective 255 billion on international travel. Now, the caliber of Chinese travelers we get could always be better in terms of higher yields. And the challenge for Sri Lanka always has been how we can, at all ends of the spectrum, from Airbnb to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-star boutique, how we can push our rates up. And that is a challenge that we're facing currently with our traveler mix and also with our past Chinese traveler mix. So hopefully Joanne, who's online, I'll introduce her shortly, will talk about the kind of Chinese traveler that we should target across the spectrum. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to mention that our next webinar at the end of March is going to be on a very interesting topic, which is on artificial intelligence, how it will transform travel marketing and booking, and in the short term, how we can take advantage of tools like ChatGPT and other travel tools, which are already playing a key role to ensure that we don't get crowded out of the conversation when people decide to travel. So that's coming up at the end of March. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our participants. Oliver is based out of Canada, and his company is a tourism industry strategist, and he works with all top tourist boards around the world in terms of how you position, how you grow yield, and so on. So Oliver will speak as a follow-up to his presentation back in November. Then we have Richard Nuttall. Richard is the CEO of Airlines. He started a couple of years ago. Richard is a Cathay man, and then he moved on to Middle Eastern Airlines before he took on the mantle. And I must say he's done a sterling job amidst a whole bunch of inherited limitations that the airline has. And exciting news about the opening of China, which was, I think after India, the second biggest origin market for the airline, that is flying into 3 Chinese cities 3 times a week. Richard will tell us more about that. Nalaka Amaratunga needs no introduction to the local trade. He is the CEO of Walker's Tours, which is part of Cinnamon and the John Keys Group. He is a veteran relatively in the DMC Sri Lanka sales side, and they have a core China focus, so he'll tell us more about that. Joanne Tang, most of you probably wouldn't know. Joanne is based in Shanghai, as you can see from the background, and Joanne has taken on more than 500 travel industry related programs. She represents several global brands, and she knows the China travel market inside out. She's worked with brands like One and Only, Scott Dunn, Rocco Forte, Hyatt. So she'll tell us more about outbound travel sentiment and how we can take advantage of it. And Katherine Droga, Droga and Company, the fearless mentor to the Tourism Alliance from our inception. Katherine's role is funded by MDF, which is part of the Australian government. Thank you, MDF. And Katherine is going to be the moderator today. So over to you, Katherine. I'll see you guys at the end.
Thank you so much, Malik, and to all of those people that are watching us either on Facebook or on Zoom, welcome. Our approach for today, as Malik mentioned, is twofold. We're going to get Oliver to start with some brand health trends and intention from consumers across 8 to 9 different markets around their appetite to travel to Sri Lanka. And he's been doing this for several years, which makes it all more interesting. And then we'll deep dive into China. And when we deep dive into China, we're going to look at opportunities, challenges, lessons learned, best practice, everything that we can do to help Sri Lanka thrive from this new opportunity of reopening flights and access from the China market. I really encourage you all to ask questions. So if you're either Facebook or on Zoom, please put it in your chats and we will collate those to ask our panelists at the end of the session and throughout when it becomes relevant. So first, I'd like to pass over to Oliver. If you can take us through some of this latest research that 2031 have done for Sri Lanka, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Katherine. And good morning, everyone. I'm just going to load up my presentation here. So folks, I'm actually Canadian, normally based in Canada. I'm actually in Berlin right now, so it's a little early in the morning. I apologize for the darkness in the background. It's still pitch dark outside. I'm going to quickly just show you some data numbers, and this is from a large longitudinal study that tracks brand health in 23 largest outbound markets, many of which are markets of importance for Sri Lanka. We don't have China data for this wave, but we are going to be going back into the market within a month and a half. And the next report that we do will likely have Chinese data. This is the only study that tracks Sri Lanka's brand health, Sri Lanka's destination brand health on a longitudinal basis. And we've got the benefit of looking back pre-COVID and then how that brand has evolved during COVID, the economic crisis that really hit last year, and how the market has reacted to some of those big news items. So with that, I'm just going to quickly just start. Brand is just so darn important to our business, and we all know that, but sometimes we don't fully absorb it. A brand is very important for an average travel consumer to make a decision about where they want to travel to. Around 60% of the decision, all the myriad items that happen out there, 60% of that decision is really about the perception that they have about a destination brand. So perception is really, really important. Malik made a really good point. It takes effort to formulate and influence how people think of a destination brand. If you do not have marketing, travel trade engagement, and PR in a marketplace, including good digital engagement, it's really hard to win the hearts and minds of travel consumers. They'll form their own opinions of a destination brand, and sometimes not necessarily the type of perception you want them to have of a destination brand. At the same point too, if Sri Lanka is not in the marketplace, then all the myriad other destinations out there that are competing for that same travel consumer will start forming their own opinions in the marketplace at the expense of Sri Lanka. So brand is important. Now we have a good news story. There's a lot of numbers, bars on the screen. We track Sri Lanka's brand, as I mentioned, in around 23 countries. I'm just highlighting here some of those key outbound source markets for Sri Lanka: France, Germany, India, Italy, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Spain, and the UK. We've looked at these numbers for the purple bar, which shows the 2021 numbers. The green bars are the October 2022 numbers, and the gray ones are from February 2023, so last month. You'll notice an upward trend from the October data. So it's showing, this is brand familiarity, that a lot of that negative sentiment that was out there in the marketplace, largely driven by, the economic crisis, the inflation crisis, the political instability, very prevalent in mainstream media, that's died down, and it's reflected in these numbers because the overall awareness of Sri Lanka as a tourism destination is on that upward trend. Now, you'll notice that it's lower than April of 2021. And again, it takes time to rebuild back trust in the marketplace. But the good news story here is around 30% of the market, averaged out, is familiar with Sri Lanka as a tourism destination. Now, in terms of interest to travel, again, interest levels are much higher, and they're also trending upwards. Interest levels are around 30 to 40% in the marketplace. This is, projected out to the total traveler population, have some level of interest in traveling to Sri Lanka in the next 12 months. Now, interest is a lot more sticky as a brand health measure than familiarity or awareness, but it's still not that likely to travel number. Again, Malik mentioned that as well. We're still not seeing that level of movement down the path to purchase, from awareness to consideration to active planning and then booking. But the good news is a large pool, around 40% of the marketplace, have an interest in traveling to Sri Lanka. Now, the job now of the travel trade is to try and shift that interest into active planning and then move them down the path to purchase to actually booking. So we have a captive audience. The job now of the travel trade and the tourism industry in Sri Lanka is to take that interest and to really drive home those bookings into Sri Lanka. So again, it's a good news story from where we were, in the December webinar presenting the October results, where it was a little bit of doom and gloom that the scores had dramatically dropped from April of 2021. But the flip side now is that we're starting to see an upward trajectory. I think we hit the bottom in 2022, and now we're on that upward trajectory. Katherine, I'm going to flip it back to you so that we can continue on with the webinar. But folks, there's a very, very detailed report. It's been sent to the Tourism Alliance, and it's being made available to all of the Tourism Alliance members.
Which is fantastic. Thank you so much, Oliver. I think what's really good about the data that you just shared there was, I think a couple of those markets in particular, I think for people that are on this webinar, picking up and bouncing back to April 2021 levels, or nearly to. So what do you feel from those markets that you've seen there are the kind of biggest opportunities at the moment for Sri Lanka? And then
good question. Yeah, good question, Katherine. So, again, Malik mentioned this before, we're just not seeing that level of bookings from some of Sri Lanka's traditional European markets, Britain, Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. And that's totally understood, right? We missed the boat in stimulating that market where they tend to travel in that November through March period. We're also going through, a pretty hectic recession in Europe, and inflationary pressures are very prevalent in Europe. The market, and I mentioned this in December, that I think is the prime market for Sri Lanka, at least in the short to medium term, and especially from a volume perspective, is India. And, we have an opportunity to capture that market. Indians tend to travel in that April to June period. It's a very large market. It's right on the doorstep of Sri Lanka. We've got great airlift into that market. And then the second market I would think of is definitely the UAE and KSA markets. We're coming up to the Eid holidays. We're also coming up to the very hot period in the Middle East, where locals and expats tend to want to travel. And what better place to go than, to spend your summer in Sri Lanka. So I think those three markets, India number one, UAE number two, followed by KSA, I think are in that short-term period, at least from the markets that we're tracking right now.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Now we're going to kind of deep dive, and we'll come back to some of those other questions as our members give us questions on the chat or the panel, so that's great. So now I'd like to jump to Richard, if that's okay. So really would like to get into a bit of a deep dive in the state of play, Richard, in terms of Sri Lankan Airlines inbound markets and aviation route performance. Can you, I know our listeners would love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of demand from all markets, and then we'll get to China.
Okay, so I mean, we don't necessarily, I mean, we look at tourism, and when we communicate, we're very active in terms of communicating actually the country rather than the airline. I mean, we see ourselves as ambassadors for the country, and so much of what we carry is to here. We agree very much with India, and we've been doing roadshows in India. We've got a big promotion in India going on at the moment. But when we go around India, there's still very much a perception. We get it everywhere we go. You know, is the country still okay? And, you know, if you go back a year, when you looked at all the news that was coming out of Sri Lanka, if you Google the last 24 hours, 9 out of 10 of the articles were always Indian publications. But what we're trying to do with all these various promotions is hope that if we get the first wave here, they will then report back to friends, relatives, whatever, that yes, it is open, and so that we can take advantage of that interest that was higher, I seem to recall, on that chart for India than most other places. So that's one thing. China is a topic of conversation, obviously, in this webinar. So at the moment, we have put in 3 flights a week to China, to 3 destinations, to Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing, starting from the summer schedule. We do have 1 to 2 flights to Guangzhou already at the moment. China, well, let's talk globally at the moment. I think the biggest challenge for airlines globally is that there isn't enough lift. So if you look at our load factors at the moment, you know, at the end of February, beginning of March, and, you know, as we go into March isn't particularly high season, it's shoulder, but everything is full. The one market that isn't completely full actually is India, which is why we want to stimulate it. But everywhere else, you know, Australia, Europe, Far East, everything is full. So the biggest challenge for us with China is capacity. We do have, we're in the middle of an exercise to try and get more capacity from the summer and going on for the rest of the year, but it's going to be slow. So the biggest challenge for us is, given that we are full and given that we've got constrained capacity, where do we actually put the aircraft? So if I look at China, and obviously longer term, China is a massive market. And if we're not taking advantage of China longer term, then you know, we need shooting. But short term, it's quite interesting. It's actually not really moving. Yes, we've carried our first group a couple of days ago, but we're not really seeing bookings picking up in that second quarter of the year. I was also in a conference earlier in the week in Singapore, and I was talking to a couple of airlines from other parts of the world, and I got similar messages there. And I think that we have a sense, and I guess we'll hear from Joanne a bit later on, but my gut feeling is that the initial travel may be VFR, and then the tourism will come a little bit later. And obviously, we're not a big VFR market for China. So we're watching it very closely. The reality is that if we see the traffic not really materializing, then we may actually be better putting some of that capacity elsewhere. I mean, would you rather have an extra couple of flights to London in the summer, or an extra couple of flights to the Middle East or India in the coming 3 months, if those are booming, if they've got holidays going on? Or would you rather have a half-empty flight to Beijing? So that's one of the questions that we're watching. And you know, where we are as an airline, we need to put capacity where it makes money. So we're not going to be able to persevere with China short term if those loads are not there. hopefully they will come. I mean, we've not cancelled anything yet, but we're just watching it very closely, and we do watch on a weekly basis how routes are doing. I think the other thing I would sort of say about China is that I think we need to also be adjusting to the kind of Chinese traveler that we're looking for. So one of the things that has changed in the world, but aviation, it's also changed in aviation, is that things have become much more expensive. So the obvious thing in aviation is fuel, which is, it's not as high as it was 6 months ago, but it's still 60% higher than it was in January last year, just over 12 months ago. So for us, it means it's gone up from being 25% of our costs to, at the moment, it's probably about 40% of our costs. And what that means is that competing for cheap package tours is not going to work. If people are going to want to have cheap fares on Sri Lankan, there's no way we're going to have fares that are going to compete with a shorter haul option to Thailand or something like that. And if we're concentrating on cheap fares, then frankly, we're much better putting the aircraft somewhere else. We're not in a position, unfortunately, given the state of the country and given our finances, which are very public, to start subsidizing routes that are not really there. So our understanding is that, you know, the Chinese market is moving more towards smaller groups, special interest individuals. And it's not that we won't carry any package tourists, but we need to have a much better mix if we're going to make China work and really be what it should be longer term.
That's excellent.
So I don't know if you want any more. That's a short.
No, I think that's a fantastic start to the discussion, Richard. I just wanted to give that framework of where your access strategy, flights, routes, etc. And I think you raise a really good point around, you know, in this day and age, with prices increasing for all businesses, it's looking at the best traveller and the best markets, etc., to keep a sustainable route strategy going. So that's good, and it's exciting to see that China is absolutely a market that needs to be looked at and is absolutely a long-term proposition. So fingers crossed, it's about rising demand and stimulating demand so that those routes can stay on. So what I might do now is just jump to Nalaka and just get your perspective from Walker's Nalaka in terms of what you're seeing, and give us an update also on some of your international markets and how they're performing. So we looked at, you know, we've talked about the area already. We obviously know that you're in UK, Europe as well. So talk to us a little bit about state of play with Walker's.
Thanks, Katherine, and good morning to all of you joined in and my fellow panelists. Sorry, I'm actually recovering after a little bit of a sore throat, so bear with me on that. Yeah, Katherine, just on your first point, yes, we've seen a bigger shift, especially starting off from end December, January onwards. Numbers seems to be, you know, getting along very well, and we've seen some good numbers coming our way, especially from the markets. Of course, India has been leading the way for Walker's tours, but at the same time, if you look at from a DMC perspective, I suppose Russia, for the other DMCs who are big in the Russian market, they've done really, you know, they've done wonders, if I may say so. And also the momentum that it has brought in to showcase that Sri Lanka is back. Is actually it has helped most of the other markets also. So I think the two big destinations for us in terms of inbound is Russian market leading the way, and also India coming as number two. But Walker's, our stronghold is mostly from the UK market and the European sector. But we see some good numbers coming from the UK market as well, because the stronghold is UK. But even if you compare with 18-19, it's still low. I would say about 30% of what we have seen. But still, if you look at the per capita, the expenditure and all that, sometimes the Western European markets do play a big role into Sri Lanka. So that's something which we need to push. In talking about the forecast that we have, I think the tourist board. So I'll most probably my discussion would be in terms of the DMC component and how we see things. So as per the tourist board, I think that we are looking at about 1.5 million arrivals for a year. So I think we look at from a financial year perspective, when you really look at the next December, January, February being a little better than this years, January, February, March, we'll most probably hit about 1.8 million to maybe about close to about 1.8 to 1.9 million if everything goes well and good. Of course, there are a lot of ifs and buts in between. But I strongly believe that China will move into the second or the third spot. Because comparatively in 2018-19, the last best year that we've done about 260,000 plus passengers for the financial year. So even if you look at the trends, we are looking at about 84% to about 80% plus if everything goes well. And that is, again, I know Richard was talking about the load factors are not really great, even though the hype is so much, which we also see. Because we have so many inquiries coming our way, so many blocked capacity of blocked rooms for the next coming 2 months, April, May. If you look at those numbers converting, we'll really have a good April, May. But the thing is, the question would be that, you can have so many blocks, but how many of that will get actually materialized into proper booking? So we are yet to see. But China being China is very last minute. So the most of the capacity will start coming in from the 3rd of April. And also I think China Eastern is coming on board with 6 flights a week from 27th of May. So with all that capacity, we are talking about, almost 2,000 seats a week. So I think it's decent. So if we have at least about a 70% load factor, we are looking at a decent, comeback. But like what I said, when the capacity is there, when it is bookable, I will see these numbers getting more confirmed more frequently rather than being just a block. So I think that has always been the trend. So I don't think that I'm not worried at this point of time, but I do have a concern, like what Richard said, whether the hype is just a hype or the hype will actually get converted into proper business. So, but we are yet to say, we fingers crossed things will be good. Then in terms of the whole dynamics of the Chinese market, if I may just add on it, as you all know, Chinese market started coming into the country 10 years ago, where we saw the peak hitting us maybe in 14, 15. But after the peak happened, we sort of started declining a bit, mainly because of the fact, maybe not in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the yield. Because the competition also sort of crept in a way that it was becoming a little unsustainable. So my from a DMC point of view, I think we all need to be a little responsible because it's a very I would say a very intense sort of a market where when the market forces come into actual play, it's overwhelming. So everyone wants to play their role, or everyone wants to sort of have a bigger chunk, to fight for that. But ultimately what happens is that it becomes a little too much at a certain point where, we as a destination might lose out. And we saw that happening in 18-19. But even if you look at now the package prices from a DMC point of view, we haven't really started on a notch higher, but we are actually starting from where we stopped in 18-19, which I feel that as a destination is a little concerning because, then if you leave a little bit room for negotiations and for the market forces to do its sort of thing, then we'll again go further down. And that will again reach out much faster to what we had in 18-19. The latter part will actually start off with something like that from the beginning, and we are looking at a fresh start. So I think we need to be a little concerned as an industry, where we hold forth as much as possible and try to see how we can yield manage it, because when the numbers hit us to that extent, coming back and adjusting later would be, I think, a no-go. So
it's
whether
such
we
a
do
good
it
point.
from day one and so, yeah. So I think that's something which we have to be a little mindful. But having said that, it's easy said than done, because we've been having a worse 3 years of history of tourism. So most of the entrepreneurs who have put their money in, it's not easy, as said, to really because at the end of the day you will get drawn into it unknowingly. Because of the market forces. But I think as an industry, we need to keep a tab on that. So I think that would be something that I would like to park my discussion at this point of time, Katherine. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Nalaka. That's such a good point. And I think this is where we're going to start to deep dive a bit into this market, because it is not one big 1 billion segment or homogeneous group. And I'd like to throw it open to Oliver to talk to us a little bit about the learnings around, for Sri Lanka in terms of reopening to the China market, a fantastic opportunity, but also what lessons can we learn from other countries, Oliver, that can help Sri Lanka?
So thanks, Katherine. So this is a good question, and it's a very deep question. I think, and many panelists have said this already. China, it's an awesome market. It's a massive outbound population, huge incidence rate of annual discretionary travel, and there's so many segments in there in that population base. But the problem is, destinations around the world, including Sri Lanka, tend to look at China as just this holistic market. And they fail to really understand that the diversity in the market and the diversity in the market segments. And at the same point too, when they look at the travel trade, they tend to just look at the mass tour or charter-based operators that are looking at that volume perspective. And I think the problem with Sri Lanka is that prior to COVID, China was looked at as a volume and not a yield market. And I think the Promotions Bureau approached the market in that way. And I think the industry kind of followed with them, or we're part of that that strategy, looking at the volume versus yield. I know the Canadian market very well. I know the Australian market very well, the France, the British, and the New Zealand markets. And those DMOs all have the same issue with China. They looked at it as volume because you're just overwhelmed by the volume of the China's market. But the thing is, they learned from their mistakes. They knew that their yield was declining year over year. They knew that there were problems with a large number of bookings in high season with low yield that were taken away from some of the rooms from some of the more higher yielding markets. And so they segmented the market. They looked at it and said, what are the segments? How can we effectively engage them, and how can we match our products and services with their needs? And that took research and a strategy. And I think what Sri Lanka needs to do in the shorter to medium term is, yes, we want people to come to Sri Lanka. We want them to fill the hotels. But in the shorter to medium term, we want to ensure that we are building good market presence, not eroding the brand in the Chinese market, and are looking at the Chinese market in terms of the experiential traveler out of China, not necessarily the high volume, low yield.
Yep. Thank you, Oliver. And tell me what country probably is still going after that low yield and is suffering for it from a business model perspective?
Yeah, and I think the simple answer is a lot of the Southeast Asian markets. Thailand is a clear example of looking at China as a volume market. Macau is a market that is looking at China as just this volume. Vietnam, Cambodia, and we don't want that, right? We don't want to turn Sri Lanka into the next Patong Beach. We want Sri Lanka to be valued for its rich, awesome products and services, and everyone can benefit. We're not talking about the luxury traveler. We're talking about the higher yielding traveler, the one that appreciates Sri Lanka for what it's offering, not the fact that it's this ubiquitous, cheap and cheerful destination.
Thanks for that, Oliver. I agree with that. I mean, Australia had this issue as well around, and I'll ask Nalaka the next question around this, the shopping tours and sort of those holidays that were almost being priced at zero or loss packages that then had a commission based on shopping. I know that it's happened in Australia before. It's happened all over the world. It happens with those large scale bus tours. What is the risk of that sort of strategy, Nalaka, for the industry overall, of going after that sector only? And what are you seeing as alternatives in that space?
Yeah, so Katherine, I think the whole bus tours per se, in the recent part, you have seen a shift from the market. I would say the demand that Sri Lanka had, from it being like a 70% bus tours, now it becoming like a 30% bus tours, and FIT sort of taking a prominent role. But I do understand there are a lot of, there's a lot of investment being done, especially by the coach operators, especially by most of the, and even our tour guides to the crew that is working. They have been working here in this industry for a long time. So they need that chunk of business coming in, which only comes from maybe a few markets like China, India, and few other European markets where it's very limited. But China being the sort of, in the market which sort of dwells in the bus tour, that segment, I think it's very important for sustaining that bus tour, that the line of business that, that our DMCs have been known for, and for the people involved. But having said that, like the question you asked is that the tours becoming cheaper and the shopping and the commissions compensating into the tour files or the profitability is something that we see. And that is also, it's like quite a risk, because it could happen, might not happen. But more risk you take, sometimes what happens is you try to, it's like you gamble, you lose, you try to sort of resurrect yourself by taking a little bit more of a risk. So it's a never-ending thing. So you sometimes you gain, sometimes you lose. But the issue is the quality of the tour itself. A lot of things, not ultimately it will happen to everyone. They look at ways of making money. So when you don't have a proper, you're not making money from your tour, and if it's a risk that you're taking, you will see what are the things that you can actually cut down on, and especially the ones you tend to cut down are the bells and the whistles. Of course, that will be the first to go, but then they'll come to a stage where they will look at what more that you can do. Ultimately, that will impact the quality of the whole tour. And sometimes there are instances where the Sigiriya is shown as Sigiriya, but they don't get to climb Sigiriya. It's just a photo moment. But of course, that is included as a part of the itinerary. So that is actually, it's a wrong way of selling the destination, because we are degrading the whole thing, and we are sort of showcasing Sri Lanka. And someone who has been in a tour where they don't get the full, or they don't get to see it in full, they go back and say, my God, it's just Sri Lanka is not the destination to go. So there's a lot of I would say, more of a negative sentiment that they're also creating by cutting down on the quality of the tour. So there's always a risk when you have that the instability of the or rather when you take a risk in terms of to make money. But having said that, shopping is a very big element in Sri Lanka. So we need the Chinese and the shopping tours, because more and more tours are becoming zero shopping. So we are not allowed to even promote shopping unless otherwise the clients sort of want to go by themselves. So, but of course, Chinese and Indians, on the other hand, we are allowed to sort of put them into shops and and to do that thing. So there's a big economy built around the shopping. So it's important that we do that shopping bit, which helps the country. And most of the Chinese, they spend quite a bit on shopping, and sometimes it's amazing and it's sort of surprising to see.
Oh, absolutely.
So
and I think it's around making sure that the money that is being spent is being returned into the economy, into the Sri Lankan economy as well. So making sure that it's supporting that.
I just want to add a little point on that. When the market forces sort of hit you with big numbers like this, there's always room for malpractices. So we've sort of seen that happening in the past, where the money, like what you said, might not, be, or money will not remain in Sri Lanka. So we need to be a little vigilant. Especially with foreign operators coming in and doing their business, the authorities have to sort of keep a close tab on it, because we've seen that happening in the past, where it's just the tour comes, the people, the clients will come and do their thing and go, but the money sort of gets collected somewhere else. So Sri Lanka as a destination will lose out. Same goes to shopping. There are so many players who will come into the picture where the money might not really remain. So even though that we think on a global scale that everyone is benefiting, the country is benefiting, technically it might not be the case. So those are things I would say the authorities also needs to keep a little closer tab, if I put it that way.
Great, thanks Nalaka. I'm going to jump to Joanne now. You're obviously you're based in China, and your business is very much focused on representing other international products into China, other tourism products. So tell us, can you comment around what you're seeing in terms of demand for Sri Lanka? It's been 2 months since China has reopened, so you've seen that kind of expansion of travel of Chinese travellers from, close to now starting to move more into longer or medium haul markets. So what are you seeing, Joanne?
Yes, thank you, Katherine. Yes, I'm based here in Shanghai, and I have been based here in Shanghai for over 10 years, and as well during this entire pandemic, so the past 3 years. And I really feel this pent-up demand of outbound travel. And when China announced the borders to reopen, and we did reopen on 8th of January, we already saw that a lot of the travel trade were gearing up, and I saw the consumers start booking overseas travel. What we've seen is that most of the travelers went for either certain reasons, either for business or for family reasons or educational reasons, and go traveling, or mainly within the region, because this is the very first trip after 3 years. So they felt more comfortable to travel within the region. And of course, going to the top preferred destinations, like closer by, which is Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, etc. But now, of course, now we've done this first wave of traveling, and we will have our other public holidays upcoming. People are looking as well, going a bit further away. So it's a good timing that Sri Lanka Airlines is now resuming their flights. So that's actually the most important, having this air access, because without air access, it's of course very challenging for us to get out, or, you know, trying to get into a destination via. So air access is definitely very, very important. Yes, so I fully agree what Richard as well mentioned, having this air access, and as well having more frequent flights as well, going from multiple cities, not only Guangzhou, but as well Shanghai and Beijing, which is great. Yes.
Thanks, Joanne. And what about, let's deep dive now into really these sorts of travellers that are coming out of China, because I want us not to think about China as one segment, but the multiple segment opportunity. You focus obviously on higher yielding visitors. Who are they, and what sort of experiences are they looking for? Because I think our listeners are really keen to know what are they looking for, and how does my business, you know, meet their needs in terms of Sri Lanka. You know, the demand for Sri Lanka is starting to really ramp up. It's a destination that we know Chinese visitors are interested in. Take us through some of these segment opportunities of types of people and experiences.
Yes. So adding up what Oliver says, a lot of destinations or hotels or travel agencies, they see China as one big market, but actually there are many different segments. You know, the country itself is so big, and we have different kind of audiences and different kind of consumer. So you have definitely from the volume travelers up till the mid-range to the luxury segment. So for us, we focus a bit more on the mid-range to luxury segments. And we see that actually once the borders reopen, those were the ones that are traveling first, because they don't have to travel during public holidays. They have their own businesses usually, and as well they don't mind you know, the higher airfare at the moment that it is going on. So that's why you see most of those travelers that are traveling now are the luxury travelers and staying in 4-star to 5-star luxury hotels. So those people at the moment, we very much looking to immersing in certain cultures and going to a different destinations, because again, we have not been traveling for 3 years. So what we see is that besides you know, traveling within Asia, we see already some of our clients going from as exotic as Africa to Antarctica, all the way to Iceland. So they go everywhere. So they really want to find those unique experiences. And I think for Sri Lanka, a destination like Sri Lanka, it has a lot of different experiences to offer. You have from from tea to beach and sea to safari. So it's pretty much like one holiday or one trip, but you have multiple experiences, multiple trips. So I think that will very much attract the current consumer that is traveling. And I as well agree with my fellow panelist, Oliver, saying as a destination, you have to as well present yourself in different ways. So if you present yourself more as a volume destination or budget destination, then you will attract more the volume and budget travelers. But if you are able to as well angle yourself and promote yourself, the uniqueness that you have that as well cater for the luxury traveler or mid-range to luxury traveler, then you'll be able as well to attract those that segment.
Great, that's a really good point. We just had a question about digital marketing that I'm just going to jump into there, just as it's come through. So obviously, we've talked about pent-up demand. We've talked about how to engage with the consumer to drive demand for Sri Lanka. Now, that can be done at a destination level, at an individual company level. Now, obviously, our listeners are asking also for a private sector hotel or a DMC to capture the market. How is the best way to kind of be able to access some of those social platforms and digital platforms with some of the restrictions, etc.?
That question is for me, is that right?
I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to throw it to a few of you, actually.
Okay. So particularly on digital and social media, right?
Yeah.
So as you all may know, actually, many of the international social media platforms are not allowed here in China. So we don't have, Facebook, etc. But we have our own set of social media platforms. And actually, at the moment, it's a day-to-day communication tool for us to communicate with each other, but as well for companies and brands to promote themselves. And the obvious one and the most targeted ones are, for example, WeChat, Weixin, and Weibo, and as well more the movies related, which is Douyin, TikTok, and of course, Little Red Book. So we have our own set of social media platforms that we use on a day-to-day basis. And this new generation is very much into the social media. That's where they get when they travel, let's say, that's where they do research. They want to hear feedback and see images and videos made by other fellow travelers. So that's actually the best way as well to promote yourself, yes, in China.
I think that's a really good point, is that we know that this market loves to take photos, it likes to capture their experiences. So advocacy and word of mouth through travellers that have a good experience in a destination and pass that on through their social networks is powerful. Oliver, would you like to comment on that briefly? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, Katherine. So just repeat the question, please.
I'm just saying that, the word of mouth, so digital channels is a powerful tool for word of mouth, referral, reviews, advisors, so that giving a good visitor experience on the ground for visitors, especially from China, will allow that kind of advocacy and word of mouth in the digital space. Just wanted you to comment on that digital marketing space for China.
Yeah, for sure, Katherine. So, this is relevant for China. It's relevant for all of Sri Lanka's other markets in Europe and in India. That path to purchase doesn't stop when they travel to the destination. 95% of travelers that are coming to the destination are bringing their smartphone with them. And that smartphone is an ability for them to create user-generated content that goes on social media platforms, the ones that are used in China, the ones that are used in Western markets. And then that helps make that content, viral. It goes to your friends and relatives networks. We know that the number one trusted source for great majority of travel consumers to find out about a destination and then to be influenced to travel to the destination is what they're hearing from their trusted friends and relative sources, which is social media. So we want those people that are coming from China or from other markets, when they're hitting the ground in Sri Lanka, take pictures, take videos, post their information, and then they become the brand ambassadors for Sri Lanka. And that is worth so much more in advertising impact than anything that Sri Lanka Tourism Promotions Bureau could do or the average operator could do, because it goes viral and it goes out there, into their networks, and it's trusted, right? It's trusted user-generated content.
And I think that's a really good point, Oliver, that's for all markets. That's not just China. It's just like giving a great visitor experience that someone is going to share, advocate, etc. on their channels is such a powerful tool. Thank you for that. Joanne, I've got two areas that I want to talk about, but just one for you is when tips for welcoming Chinese visitors to have a great experience on the ground in Sri Lanka. Obviously, the language issue is a critical thing, but if you can't have English-speaking staff, etc., what else can you do to ensure that they're maximising a quality experience on the ground?
Yes, thank you for the question. Just adding up a bit more information about the previous point about digital. So the consumer, of course, they can create content, which is great. But remember that the trade, so the travel agencies and as well the media, they as well have their own social media platforms, and they have as well a very powerful network behind. So you need to somehow, either your hotel or DMC or travel brand, you have to as well ask them to feature you on that. I know that a lot of hotels or travel brands still are very into having media coverage, but then on print in magazines. But actually, if you're on their social media, the digital side of the media side, it goes actually to a wider audience. So that's another point that you can take note. About, if you're a hotel, hospitality or travel provider, how to get ready to welcome the Chinese, I think that's very important. So the promotion, I think that's stage 2. Stage 1 is really getting your hotel or your travel agency's services and experiences ready for the Chinese traveler. And yes, if you are just starting to develop the market, you may not want to right away invest in Chinese speaking staff, but then there is as well some easier way. You just translate certain marketing material. Let's say for a hotel, you can translate a welcome letter stating all your unique highlights of the property, your services, your activities, your experiences. If you have, certain unique dining concept, you can as well put it in so that the Chinese traveler, when they check in, they know what the hotel has to offer. Because very often, maybe some hotels will say, the Chinese traveler that I had, the guest that I had, didn't spend on our spa facilities or our fine dining facilities, but it's maybe that they don't know. And if you prepare all this material in Chinese, they know, then they can really maximize their visit. And if they maximize their visits, they will be more content and then as well recommending you to their other friends and family and contacts. Yes.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. That's fantastic. A great tip. I'm going to go back to Richard now for a second, if you're still with us, Richard. You talked about, you're such a critical part of the puzzle for China and the long-term success. You're talking about competitive route analysis and profitability and filling seats and yield management. So what does the industry need to do you believe, to support you in that journey around, getting the right visitors, filling the planes, etc.? What do you think needs to be done?
Well, I think that that we're all a part of an ecosystem, and we all play our roles. I think the most important thing that we can try and do is be as consistent as what we're going to do in terms of what we're going to fly. And yes, we actually need to get much better ourselves in terms of our digital presence. We're probably like many people, we have historically relied probably too much on tour operators, and we have sales teams that are geared towards dealing with sales operators and agents rather than having sort of digital marketing teams around the world. And that's something that we're looking at. And obviously it's true everywhere in the world, and particularly true in China. And I think, we just all need to gradually make that movement together, and some people are ahead of others. But the world is moving away from mass market, and if we're going to try and do the mass market stuff, we're not going to be particularly profitable, and that doesn't help anybody anyway. So yeah, I think we just need everybody to play their part. I would agree with Malik with what he said earlier. I mean, the tourism board in Sri Lanka is not geared to do this stuff, so it relies upon us to do it ourselves. Some of the stuff that we do in partnership with other people within the chain, and we're happy to continue doing that. But yes, I think we probably all need to get a little bit better at being digital. We need to get a little bit better at making sure that the service we provide meets the needs of the customers who come. I think that experience and word of mouth is important. So maybe we do need to bring people here. We need to make sure that we take them to places that are ready to receive Chinese visitors, and keep working. It's a journey. There's not a button that you can press that means it's all going to happen tomorrow. But we need to get much better at digitalization and segmentation, and giving people what they need. And where we see things that work, we do more of them. Where we see things that don't work, let's try something different. But yeah, I mean, that's all. Yeah, there's nothing particularly earth-shattering about that. It's something we should all be doing anyway.
I think it's really valuable insight and really relevant for the moment. One of the things we saw, and actually this was something that you sent me, Richard, was a survey from 2022 from Dragon Trail, which was really interesting, that they have just talked about that this group of smaller groups and independent travellers are paying more attention to sustainability and valuing experiences. I think the survey said 48% of prospective Chinese travellers choose accommodation with environmentally friendly options. Now, that's something that perhaps people are not aware of, or that they choose, 46% are choosing operators that are looking at sustainable wildlife experiences. And Oliver is putting up his hand because he's very excited to comment on this. So jump on in. You're in, Oliver.
Sure.
And also, this whole nature outdoor activities, looking for open space out of the city experience.
Yeah. So Katherine, Dragon Trail is an awesome company. They really understand the travel and tourism market in China. I'm going to tell you that now that number is overinflated. We have a longitudinal measure of sustainable tourism and access to sustainable tourism products and sustainable consumption in the 20 largest outbound markets, including China. That number is, actually closer to around 20%. And then when push comes to shove, are you actually willing to pay money for the difference in that? The numbers drop. The point is, it's going upwards. Ecotourism does not exist anymore. Sustainable tourism is becoming more mainstream. And the type of consumer that, again, Sri Lanka should be targeting, this higher yielding type of travel consumer. They're a little bit more sophisticated in their taste. It's not their first rodeo. They've been to many destinations around the world, and they're looking for something different. They value, a good quality airline experience that's offered on Sri Lankan Airlines. These are the types of travelers we want to Sri Lanka, and they want to pay a living wage. They want to know that where they're staying, values their employees, that values the environment. And again, this is where we want the market to go. But it all comes back to what Richard is saying. We need to ensure that the tools are in place so that the operators and the industry in Sri Lanka are able to connect through to those types of travel consumers. When we just go to this mass market approach, where we treat all travel trade operators the same, you go to ITB, you go to WTM, and you just treat the Chinese market as this holistic market, we're losing the narrative. The narrative is we need to be more discerning in the Chinese market, like all the other markets out there. And, we're on the map right now in the Sri Lankan tourism industry. We need to build back volume, but we don't want to do this at the expense of the medium and longer term play, which is really valuing the asset we have in Sri Lanka and the notion that we can target and succeed in targeting that higher value traveler, especially out of the Chinese market.
Excellent. I'll go to Nalaka here for just a second to comment on this, because I know that you're looking at segments as well and segment opportunities, and you're looking at those smaller, like families or wellness travelers in the wildlife space. Could you comment a little bit on that, Nalaka?
Yeah, I think it's very important that what even Joanne said that we need to segment our product without just pushing the mass tours. So we've also looked at wellness, because if you look at the segment from China outbound to wellness, there is a market out there. It's just that they don't know that Sri Lanka offers that kind of wellness. So we need to be there. We need to focus and do a little bit of marketing and drive that segment if you want to get some numbers in. It's not easy as said, but of course we have to start somewhere. And also talking about even people with special needs, if you look at the population, and that whole the middle class to the upper class is traveling. So even if you get 1% of that market, it's huge. So we need to sort of segment our offering. We need to showcase that Sri Lanka has much more than just a bus tour or a 6-day tour, which they every day sort of travels for almost like 4 to 5 hours. Rather than that, they can come for different purposes, different reasons: wellness, mind and body detoxing, even maybe a little bit of high end where we do have the rooms and the capacity, and also even a different segment, even the elderly to we have a product for pretty much for that entire spectrum. So we need to be a little more specific in what we choose and how we sort of grab that. So we as a company, we focus on wellness quite a bit, and we've sort of looking at that being a bit of a channel for us to bring in business. And China is definitely one of the markets that we are focusing on. And there were a few questions as to how can we go to market with Chinese. I think we need to also talk to the right agents, because China also have so many agents specializing in different. So we have only been talking to the ones who are bringing bus loads of people. So we need to find out who are the niche markets, who are the niche agents, who are the wellness agents, and together with the authorities and the promotions bureau to help them out to see whether we can do we attend maybe certain travel shows, or maybe to get to meet them. So there are things that we need to start planning out, but without having a proper plan now, which will get executed maybe at least end of the year or maybe by next year, it will be very difficult to sort of expect things to happen, because otherwise we'll be only doing what we know, which is pretty much the bus tours. So that would be my sort of take on it, Katherine.
It is.
Yeah, exactly. Focus on specific niche-based operators, right? We don't want to go to every tour operator out there that's just generic and ubiquitous. We want to go to the ones that are aligned to the type of travel Sri Lanka needs and wants and should go after, and the types of products that Sri Lanka has a competitive advantage on. And one of them happens to be wellness. And so let's go after those operators that value the product Sri Lanka has and bring them into the country. And guess what? Those people will also do adventure. They will also sit on the beach. They will also do cycling. It doesn't mean that they're just doing that one activity. But this goes back to the importance and the power of a good segmentation for Sri Lanka. And I know the operators all get that.
Yep, no, that's fantastic. And competitive advantages of Sri Lanka. Go play to your strengths, play to what Sri Lanka has as a strength in the market and what they offer. I'm going to wrap up now and pass back to Malik just to kind of wrap this discussion up, because I'm mindful of time. I know we're getting lots of questions here. Malik, over to you.
Thank you, Katherine, and thank you all the panelists. It was a very interesting discussion, very relevant. Quite a few questions. We couldn't answer them all, but we'll follow them up, responses in social media. I mean, what we heard is that this mass market, one size fits all, doesn't work. It applies to China. It applies to the whole world. The travel decision is actually taken by the consumer, and the consumer has aspirations, and there are so many elements of consumers. It's not just one type. And however much some in the industry may fight to maintain the status quo, it's inevitably going to happen. It's an absolute fact of life. So unless we form, as Oliver said earlier, we have to help form our own perception of Sri Lanka. In the absence of us communicating again to the consumer, who is the person who makes the travel decision, nobody else. It's not the trade who makes the travel decision. The trade supports, the trade is a channel. Unless we reach the consumer and form their perceptions, we are victim to whatever perception that the international media forms of us, which is generally negative, or of the perceptions that other destinations form of their destinations through sophisticated consumer marketing, which makes us look like an also-ran. So unless we focus more on a more desirable, aspirational positioning, which, to clarify, yields across all segments. There is a misconception in Sri Lanka that when you talk of yield, you're only talking of so-called high end. I mean, that is ridiculous. The argument is higher end, which means that the 2-star will get $10 more, the 4-star will get $30 more, the 5-star will get $60 more, and the boutique will get $100 more. So unless we move to become more of a desirable, aspirational, higher yielding, not high, higher yielding destination, and are viewed as we have in the past been as cheap and cheerful, as we heard from Nalaka, look at the rates, look at the yields. I mean, what are the margins that people are making on their tourism businesses, and look at the other avenues they might have to pursue because they're not making money on their core business. So everything we heard, whether it's China, whether it's the rest of the world, everything Oliver's talking about, everything that Richard is talking about in terms of yield factors and so on and demand for this country is connected back to perception, positioning. So even the season that we're having now, which is below expectation, was entirely avoidable. It's not something that just happened and is organic, because we could have avoided it if we had simply got that safety back to normal message out since normalcy returned in July. So I really think going forward as an industry, we have to look at charting our own course, getting that perception out. People have a very muddled perception of Sri Lanka. What is it? Is it a bit of wellness? Is it a bit of high end? Is it mass market? Is it a bus tour? Is it wildlife? So we hear all these positives in different parts, but there is no clear message like you might have in some of our competing destinations. So I'd like to other connected aspects in terms of one of the questions on the chat was about service standards dropping across the industry. Are we in a position to cope with increased demand? Service standards are dropping because of migration because we are not able to pay global rates. So if our industry was in better shape, we can pay close to global market rates and retain staff. So it's really a bit of a vicious cycle we are in. And I really hope that the industry will get together to try and chart our own course in terms of clear communication with consumers, which can only be through digital and PR, only digital and PR. And we've sadly not done any of that as a country. I hope that can change. Maybe we should partner with the airline because they have so much riding on this. Sri Lankan performs an amazing service in offering direct non-stop flights. The modern traveler does not want the hub and spoke as much. Hub and spoke can be cheaper. You might have a more modern, newer aircraft, but there is nothing to beat the convenience of a non-stop, whether it's from Sydney, Melbourne, London, Moscow, and so on. So the airline also would benefit in terms of filling more of the premium seats and people paying higher fares because non-stop is very much in demand amongst travelers who are slightly higher yielding. So in conclusion, I would like to thank all of you for your invaluable contributions. We're going to be following up with a press release and answering any questions that we couldn't. I would like to thank the EU for supporting the Tourism Alliance with our very successful destination marketing campaign. We've shown how through clever targeting and a reasonable use of funds, we get a really high rate of return because digital is pay-per-click. It's not a shotgun approach, you're targeting specific demographics, and that's what we should all be doing. So thank you, EU, for that. Our next webinar is on artificial intelligence. There was another question which we couldn't answer in terms of the fact that digitizing tourism means that intermediaries are going to get impacted. How should they react? How should they respond? So all of that will hopefully come up at the next webinar at the end of March. So that's it from me. Thanks again, Katherine. Thank you all the panelists for coming in from different parts of the world, and have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.